Okay, so we're diving deep today into something a lot of us probably think about, learning a new language. And, it can be really rewarding, but also a bit tricky at times.
Absolutely.
So we've been looking at, all sorts of materials and articles and tips and stuff like that, trying to really figure out why people hit those roadblocks and how to get past them.
Right, because it's really fascinating how even though people are learning all these different languages around the world, a lot of the kind of things they struggle with are very similar,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, totally. And that's what we wanna sort of give you guys today. Like, how can you make this process a little bit easier and more fun? And how can you avoid some of the frustration that sometimes comes along with it?
Hmm.
So one of the first things that really jumped out at us from all these materials was that a lot of people are really held back by this fear of making mistakes.
That's huge, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
It can be really intimidating to try to speak in front of other people.
Yeah. And I think it stops people from actually using the language.
Exactly.
They're so worried about getting it perfect
Yeah.
that they don't get to that point where they can actually just have a conversation.
Yeah, I mean you can't get better unless you're practicing and using it.
Right.
And one thing that's really interesting that they pointed out is that when we do make those mistakes, our brains actually like use those as a way to learn.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really important to kind of reframe that, and instead of thinking of it as like, oh, I made a mistake, think of it as, oh, this is feedback.
Right.
This is how I'm going to learn.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties into having a supportive environment too, right? Like if you have a language partner or a tutor or some kind of group that you're learning with where everybody is in the same boat and you're not afraid to just kind of put it out there,
Exactly.
that can make a huge difference.
It's about creating that safe space to experiment
Right. Yeah.
without judgment.
And kind of, building on that fear of making mistakes is this whole idea of, grammar. It can be so overwhelming.
For sure.
Especially when you're first starting out, like all the rules and the conjugations and the tenses and everything, you can just get so bogged down in it.
It's like this massive mountain that you have to climb.
Right. And the materials that we were looking at suggested that, focusing too much on grammar, especially in the beginning, can actually stop you from speaking.
Right, because you get so worried about getting the grammar perfect that you're not really thinking about the meaning or communicating effectively.
Exactly. And I think that's where the idea of finding a balance comes in.
Hmm.
Like grammar is important. You need to understand the structure of the language, but you don't want it to be this obstacle.
Right, it's a tool. It's a tool for understanding and expressing yourself.
Yeah. And they talked a lot about this idea of learning grammar in context.
Yeah, through real use.
Yeah. So instead of just, memorizing a bunch of rules, actually using the language and seeing how grammar works in real situations.
Because when you actually apply the grammar through speaking or writing, it sticks so much better than just kind of passively absorbing the rules.
Right. It's like anything else. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Exactly.
Okay, so another thing that kept coming up in the research was this idea of consistency.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Right. Like we've had those bursts of, super intense study sessions.
Sessions.
Right. And then, life gets in the way or we just kind of lose motivation and we take a break for a while.
We all do it.
Yeah. And what these materials really emphasize is that even short but regular daily engagement with the language is so much more effective than those big bursts of energy followed by long breaks.
Yeah, it makes sense when you think about how our brains work.
Yeah.
That regular exposure strengthens the connections in your brain.
Right. That's like those neural pathways or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, instead of trying to do everything at once, try incorporating small chunks of language learning into your daily routine.
Yeah, like listening to music in the language while you're commuting or watching a show or, even just spending 10 minutes a day on a language learning app.
Right. Those small, consistent efforts really make a difference over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of actually using the language, we noticed that a lot of learners tend to focus more on the passive skills like reading and writing, but they don't practice speaking enough.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like you're making progress when you can understand a text or you can write something down.
Right.
But really putting those thoughts into words and actually speaking out loud is where the real learning happens.
Yeah, and I think, some of it goes back to that fear of making mistakes.
Right.
But the sources that we were looking at really stress that speaking is not just a skill that you develop later.
It's an integral part of the learning process.
Yeah, and they encourage learners to seek out opportunities to speak, even if it's just with a language partner or a tutor or, even just recording yourself.
Don't wait until you feel completely ready.
Right.
Just jump in and start practicing.
Exactly, because that's how you're going to build that confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another habit that a lot of us have is relying too much on translation.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
Right. Like you see a word and you immediately want to know what it means in your native language.
Right, we automatically go to that translation mode.
Yeah, but the thing is, and what these materials explain, is that constant translation can actually prevent you from thinking directly in the new language.
Mm-hmm. It kind of creates this barrier.
Yeah, it's like your brain is always taking this detour through your native language instead of just processing the new language directly.
And what's interesting is that different languages often have different ways of expressing ideas.
Yeah.
So a direct word-for-word translation can sometimes sound really unnatural or even be grammatically incorrect.
Yeah, right. It's not always a one-to-one mapping.
Exactly.
So the sources suggest trying to wean yourself off translation as much as possible and trying to understand the meaning in context.
Like using a monolingual dictionary, for example.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Where the definition is in the target language itself.
Right, and that forces you to really engage with the language on its own terms. Okay, last but not least, our sources talked a lot about pronunciation.
Yeah, that can be a big stumbling block for learners.
Yeah, and it's easy to overlook.
Right, because people tend to focus more on vocabulary and grammar.
Right.
Yeah.
But what these materials point out is that even if you have great grammar and you know a lot of words, if your pronunciation isn't clear, it can be really difficult for people to understand you.
Exactly. And it can also make it harder for you to understand native speakers.
Right.
Because you're not used to hearing the sounds correctly.
Yes, the materials really stress that you should start focusing on pronunciation right from the beginning.
Yeah, from day one.
Yeah, and they recommend things like actively listening to native speakers, paying attention to how they form the sounds and how they use intonation.
And trying to mimic that.
Yeah, exactly.
Really immerse yourself in the sounds of the language.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of potential pitfalls.
Yeah, quite a few.
But the good news is the sources also provide a lot of really helpful strategies for success.
For sure.
So like one of the key things is setting clear and achievable goals.
Right. You want to make sure your goals are smart, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right. So you're not just saying, oh, I want to learn Spanish. You're saying, I want to be able to have a basic conversation in Spanish in 6 months.
Exactly.
Something that you can actually work towards.
And another important point is immersing yourself in the culture.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Like watch movies, listen to music, read books, surround yourself with the language as much as possible.
Yeah, and that helps you learn so much more than just the words and grammar.
Right. It gives you a deeper understanding of the culture and the people who speak the language.
Right.
Which makes the whole learning experience so much more enjoyable.
And the last thing that they really emphasized was patience and persistence.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like language learning is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exact.
And there will be times when you feel frustrated or you feel like you're not making progress.
Right.
But it's important to just keep going.
Yeah. And they also talk about the importance of celebrating those small wins along the way.
Yes.
Like acknowledging your progress and giving yourself credit for how far you've come.
Because that helps you stay motivated.
Yeah, exactly.
And it reminds you why you're doing this in the first place.
So basically what we've learned from all this research is that by understanding these common hurdles that language learners face, things like the fear of errors, over-focusing on grammar, inconsistency, lack of speaking practice, over-reliance on translation, neglecting pronunciation. And then by applying these strategies that we've talked about, setting clear goals, immersing yourself in the culture, using a variety of resources, being patient and persistent, and celebrating your progress, you can really make this journey a lot more effective and enjoyable.
Absolutely. So thinking about your own experience with language learning, which of these potential pitfalls really resonates with you the most?
Yeah.
And what's one small step you can take today to address it?
That's something to think about.
It is.
All right, thanks for diving in with us today.
It was a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.